Broadcasting live from the Disney Gallery, it's Contemporary Inc. with your host, Bill Blair, your Lorcana podcast. Well, we're back, and I think the numbers have spoken. Your voices have been heard. The format for the last 2 weeks, you guys hate it, and I'm never going to do it again, I promise. If you tuned in the last 2 weeks and then immediately tuned out, I totally get it. It was an experimental format. Opening packs seems to work on YouTube. People love it. Instagram, people love it. TikTok cannot get enough of opening packs. But Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, I guess, nobody cares. And I totally understand. It's really more of a visual format. But I think that the stuff we covered has merit. And if you like the show, maybe go back and give it a chance. Give it a listen. I think there's something that you might find interesting there. And maybe you have insomnia and you're having problems sleeping and you need a little something to bore you into unconsciousness. That might work too. Anyway, let's move on to this week's topic, which is the rise of the Floodborn, which we were able to get some cards for. We weren't able to get any packs other than the packs that came with the 2 starter decks we got. And I am so thrilled to go over them with you today. Let's see what happens. So for those of you that are new to the collectible card game scene, a starter deck is basically a turnkey deck of 60 cards that's manufactured by Ravensburger for you to start playing immediately. It actually comes with everything you need to start playing, including the little chips, a lore counter, and even a truncated, very small playmat to sort of get you started. And if you've got $16.99 MSRP, you can get yourself a deck that's ready to play. If you go on dreamborn.inc and start poking around at decks that do really well, they can start at $50 to $80 and easily climb into the hundreds for a deck that's going to be competitive. These decks that you're going to get from Ravensburger are not quote-unquote competitive, and if you went up against a deck that costs $300, there's a good chance that you're not going to fare very well. But if you want to spend less than $40 and have some fun with your friends, this is a great way to get into the game. And I find it not only a great way to something to familiarize myself with these new cards, because you get so many of them, but you also get to explore some of the new game mechanics. Now, like a lot of things with Lorcana, the decks are filled with less expensive, more available cards. You do get a couple rare cards. You get some foil cards in here, but you're not going to get uber rare $100 cards. It's not random. And the cards you're going to get, because they're more common, are going to have simpler, easier to understand play features, which would make them great for someone who's learning the game. And that's why I got them, because ultimately the podcast is for you guys, the casual player. We're finding so much value in these starter decks. And let's see, the theme of these 2 starter decks are the Queen and Merlin. That Queen deck has 2 foil cards, the Commanding Presence Queen, and a Floodborn version of Gaston called Intellectual Powerhouse. Now that version of Gaston is wearing a similar kind of steampunk getup to the Tinkerer Belle that we've seen before, and the Queen is, in her regular fare. She's a Floodborn queen, and it's pretty standard. I'm not overly impressed with this 5-cost queen who shifts for 2. Ooh, that's a pretty good deal. Anyway, and while the deck is named after the queen and her picture is on the box, you're going to find a couple of Snow Whites in here, but the real standout is what they've done with the Seven Dwarves. Not only did they include all 7 of the 7 dwarves in this Floodborn expansion, they included all 7 of the 7 dwarves in this deck. In fact, you're going to get multiples of each dwarf, and each one has its own special ability. Now, some of them decrease the cost of your next character. Some of them are hindered by their own natural abilities, like Sleepy comes into play exerted, so he literally is asleep when brought into play. But he costs 2. Okay, he's inkable. In fact, all of the dwarves are inkable. And for that 2 ink, you get a 2/3 that quests for 2. So not a bad deal if you're willing to bring him into play exerted. And if you wanted to augment this deck with something that could ready a character on command, that would make Sleepy a lot less vulnerable, much more useful. Another standout here is Bashful, and really playing into the thematic elements of these 7 dwarves. Bashful can't quest unless there's another 7 dwarves character in play. So he costs 4. He's a 2/5, which is in and of itself not bad, but he quests for 3, and you get 2 of them in this deck. I think I would put a few more of the cheaper 7 dwarves characters like Sneezy and Sleepy in this deck, and then put a couple more Bashfuls in there just so that he's always got a friend to go questing with. Another standout is Grumpy, who gives all the other 7 dwarves characters +1 on offense, and Dopey, which I think is probably the one that's going to make you think the most. And whenever Dopey is banished, all of the other 7 dwarves characters get +2 attack until the start of your next turn. So it's not even until the end of this turn. It's +2 until the beginning of your next turn, which is, going to keep them angry about Dopey's absence through the entirety of your opponent's next turn, which I think is quite interesting. Now that we've covered the kind of monolith in this deck, because the 7 dwarves take up so much of the characters in this deck, but there's again so many. We're gonna check in on what I think is the beefiest boy, and that is Christopher Robin. Christopher Robin is not screwing around. Rabbit or Owl is definitely in this deck, and Winnie the Pooh is in this deck. I could definitely see a 100 Acre Wood deck coming in the next expansion, but Christopher Robin, whenever you ready this character and you have 2 or more other characters, which is gonna, with all these dwarves running around, it's very possible, you just gain 2 lore. Whenever you ready this character, mind completely blown. He also quests for 2, which is, again, not bad. There's a little tip of the hat from Zootopia. The Popsicle, got a little paw on it. Whenever you play this item, you may draw a card. Great. Banish this item, remove up to 2 damage. So actually an item that does 2 different things, I think, and it only costs 1. This is a heck of a deal. Now, there's not a lot of songs in this deck, which is weird because it actually includes a singer in Gaston, but 4 Dozen Eggs, which is a song new to this expansion, all of your characters gain resist +2 until the start of your next turn. So none of this until the end of the turn. It goes into play as long as, the next round of play goes. But it's +2, and resist is probably the power that I am the most excited about, because I think it really matches my style of play. You put characters out, you push all this resist on them, and then they can take a little more hits. Me and the missus were talking about how unsatisfying it is that you go through all the trouble of bringing one of these characters into play, and then they immediately get taken out the next turn. And resist is going to help keep those characters around a little bit longer. Gaston, Intellectual Powerhouse, is one of the foil cards that comes in this set, and he shifts for 4. He costs 6, and he's not inkable. I'm not even thrilled with the art on this, which I don't know. I think they could have done a little bit better. But when you play this character, look at the top 3 cards in your deck, put one in your hand, the rest go on the bottom. So we've seen this ability before in that they are calling Developed Brain. But for a non-inkable card that costs 6 and is a 4/4, now he quests for 3, I guess, but there's nothing here that makes this card extra special for me. I don't know. I just don't see it. Another card that I like, and it's launch, banish chosen item of yours to deal 5 damage to chosen character. So this is Fire the Cannons or Smash, but for Emerald, and it lets you turn items into indirect damage, which is fun, but the image is like a crossbow firing a coconut. And I think they're the coconuts from the coconut basket. So they've been repurposed in this piece of art that is obviously unique to Lorcana. This doesn't come from any specific Disney property. And I think we're going to find a few more of those floating around in this set. There were 1 or 2 in the original. Now we've got some honorable mentions here. Gumbo Pot. Remove 1 damage from each of 2 chosen characters. So it's like Coconut Basket, but I think a little more versatile. Now it does force you to choose 2 characters to do only 1 healing, but I think that that's maybe a little more useful. Coconut Basket, sometimes that 2 just, I'd love to spread it around a little bit. And perhaps if you could use both of those in tandem, that would be pretty interesting. The Queen, who came with this set, the foil card, whenever this character quests, chosen opposing character gets -4 this turn, and chosen character gets +4 offensive this turn. This is an absolutely devastating card. Used in conjunction with some of the other cards that we've seen in this expansion, I can see this Queen card being very versatile, and you can ink her, and the power and defense is pretty good. This is a hot card. The Grand Duke's coming in and continuing a tradition that we saw in the previous set of granting your prince, princess, king, and queen characters +1 offense, just as long as he's in play. I think that there's only 1 of these in this deck, and I think if you had a deck that was built around prince and princess characters, kings and queens, you could stack 4 of these in there. I think that this card is going to become increasingly valuable over the next couple of years as people start building decks specifically built around this prince, princess, king, queen mechanic. Finally, from the honorable mentions pile, we've got Winnie the Pooh. Who couldn't fall in love with this Storyborn Yellow Bear? Whenever this character quests, you may put a card from your hand into your inkwell face down. I know that there's lots of ways to gain ink, but this is just an easy way to throw more cards in there. I could see Winnie the Pooh. You only get 1 in this deck, but they're in a starter deck, so they're going to be cheap. You can go on eBay and probably pick up 4 of these right now for $2. But this card, in conjunction with some very large cards, you could find yourself in the mid game putting out some 6 or 8 cost characters real quick. And just wrapping up the kind of just some thoughts. Cruella de Vil, and you get 3 of them in this deck, but Cruella de Vil gets evasive on your turn, which is in and of itself not completely surprising. She's a 3/2, she costs 2, she's inkable, she quests for 1. Nothing special here, but this is the only card with evasive in the entire deck. And when I was playing with the misses last night, Cruella actually came into play because there's evasive cards in that Merlin deck. And it just seems, I don't know, short-sighted that you would allow only 3 cards with evasive in the other starter deck. Evasive just seems like such a powerful ability that it you wouldn't want to leave it untapped or unchecked. And finally, Hiram Flavorsham is my kind of card. He costs 4. He's a 1/6, so he's going to soak up damage while he's questing for 1. But when you play this character and whenever he quests, you may banish one of your items to draw 2 cards. So this is another Emerald card that's heavily targeting items, and there's a couple of them in this deck. I didn't go over all of them, but there's a lot of item focused cards that I'd love to see brought to bear on a whole array of item decks that I just haven't seen people playing. There's gonna be more items coming out, as in 6 months, a year. A card like this might be way more valuable. And I could definitely see this being part of some new facet of the meta in the future. And then again, shifting gears abruptly, we're going to take a quick look at that Merlin deck with Merlin Shapeshifter and Tiana Celebrating Princess. This starter deck actually pays homage in a very similar way to Snow White, but with fewer cards, to that epic magic fight between Madame Mim and Merlin in The Sword and the Stone. Now, I don't know why we haven't seen more card sets like this coming from Lorcana. Perhaps this is going to be something we'll see more of in the future. But they're taking one scene that probably lasts, 5 minutes, and they're just taking it to the hilt. In this deck are 6 cards referencing this wizard fight, and you've got a pretty equal spread between Merlin and Madame Mim in 6 different animal forms. Now, Merlin is always in sort of shades of blue, and Madame Mim is always in shades of magenta and purple. But we're looking at snakes and crabs and goats and squirrels and foxes and rabbits, and they're neck and neck, meeting each other at every step. The powers that are on display here are interesting. Madame Mim is taking advantage of this new bounce feature that is prominent in the Floodborn expansion, and that gives you the ability to play a card and then immediately either return or take that card and remove it from the game, or return a card to your hand. And I know what you're thinking. Why would you want to do that? And it has to be your card. Basically, what we're doing here is if you have a character that is big enough to have soaked up enough damage, but not enough to remove it from the game, you can play Madame Mim Snake. And basically what it says is when you play this character, banish her or return another chosen character of yours to your hand. So she costs 2, and she's a 3/3, and she quests for 1. And basically this lets you trade her for another card that you have already in play. So again, in the example of, let's say, Kronk Junior Chipmunk, and he's got a defensive power of 5. If he's got 4 damage on him, and he's a good character, you want to keep him in play as long as possible, play Madame Mim, return Kronk to your hand, and you basically have to replay him anew for only 2 ink, and I think that's a heck of a deal. You also have the option with Merlin to do things like when he comes into play, gain a lore, but also when he leaves play. So it's that problem we were having where the characters are able to do some special power, but only do it when they come into play. Well, now that's been doubled to leaving play. Banished is now part of that. And imagine using Madam Mim to insert a character into play and then remove him from play. These cards are designed to work together. Another thematic thing that they're doing, and we're not even seeing all of these cards in this starter deck because I've seen more of them online, is Cinderella. And what they're doing with these Dreamborn Cinderellas are really hot. Cinderella is not a chambermaid. She's a knight in training. And what we see here is her in practice armor. She's got what looks to be like a fencing foil, and she's going up against a practice dummy. And when you play this character, you may draw a card and then choose and discard a card. So this is the tiny tactician power grafted onto something that costs 2. She's a 2/2. She quests for 1. And you are going to want to shift one of the bigger Cinderellas on top of this one. So keep that in mind. Also coming from the Cinderella franchise is what I think is underserved in this deck by only having 2. And that's the Prince Never Gives Up. He costs 3. He's a 1/3, so not that big of a deal. Now he quests for 2, interesting, but he also has Bodyguard. So early in the game, this guy's gonna be protecting your other characters, and he has Resist. And in a couple of games, I was able to pair him with an item, and we'll just quick move on to items. There's not a lot of items in this deck, but Mouse Armor is a tiny little suit of armor with Mickey ears on it, and that gives you resistance of +1 for 1 character until your next turn. So it doesn't just cover you on this turn, but it also covers you on your opponent's turn. And I think that's great because I was able to give the Prince here a resistance of +2, and that meant that you had to hit him for at least 2 to do any damage at all. And, he's not offensively powerful with just that 1, but I think we had to attack him 3 separate times on 1 turn just to get him out of the way, because questing for 2 is, again, very powerful and certainly early on in the game. So I think that this card is going to be really important coming up. Let's see what else we got here. Moving on to other items is a fun little lark. It's called Last Cannon, and it's from Mulan. It costs 1, and you have to banish it. And chosen character gains challenge +3 this turn. So that means you can take some piddly little character on, turn 2 or 3, I guess, and turn them into a real powerhouse. If you're drawing bad, you've got these like little piddling 2/2 characters and your opponent's pulling out stuff with defense of 5, and you need something to deal with that, this is a great card. I would actually there's only 2 in this deck, I would put at least 4. And because it's an item and it only costs 1, you can play it on turn 1 and keep it in your pocket for, half the game if you need to, until you need it. And then it's available to use for just 1 ink. Whereas, other items that would do similar amounts of damage would cost 2 or 3. I think this spreads that cost out and makes it a lot more accessible. Let's look at the foil cards. I think they kind of bury the lead with these foil cards because they're not the best cards in the game. And these aren't even good examples of good foil cards. Princess Tiana, Celebrating Princess, has a resist of +2, and she quests for 2. And while this character is exerted and you have no cards in your hand, your opponent can't play actions. I don't know how often that's going to come into play, but it's an interesting play feature. The fact that you can't ink this card is disturbing. And then the other foil card is Merlin Shapeshifter, and when one of your other characters is returned to your hand from play, this character gets +1 lore for the rest of that turn. And, that's interesting. He's a 1/5, so he's going to be out there questing a lot, I think. At least 2 or 3 turns. So that's nice. And if you're going to be building a thematic Sword in the Stone deck, I think that you're going to be using that bounce feature a lot. He's going to be good for that. You could probably pick up a couple of these. They're rare, but they're not like super rare. So you could pick up a couple of these on eBay and really build a deck around this bounce feature. There's one nod in this deck to Raya and the Last Dragon. Or I think it's Raya and the Last Dragon, because I've never seen this movie and I frankly don't care. It costs 3. It's a 2/3. It quests for 2. And when you play this character, you may banish chosen item. So assuming that your opponent is playing a lot of items, that could be devastating. Or in my case, I'll never play that card, so who cares? Just from a... Let's take a look at just generally good cards that are inserted into this deck. 3 of them are from Princess and the Frog, which I think is great, because that's a fun movie, and I can't wait to finally get on the new Princess and the Frog ride, Tiana's Log Adventure. As far as just good all-around cards go, Chip the Teacup is a perfect example of a card that is inkable, costs 1, is a 2/2, and, it quests for 1. This is a fine card. There's a couple of these in this deck, and I fully support that decision. Moving into, again, the 3 cards from Princess and the Frog, we got Tiana, and she is lifting so many beignets, and I'm sure her beignets are pillowy soft, and all she's lifting really is that powdered sugar. But, it costs 1, and the card is a 1/3, and she quests for 1, and there's no special powers. This is just a good card. You could play this at any time, or ink it. Who cares? The next 2 cards are Princess Naveen, who is a 3, and is a 4/3. He quests for 1, which, you could ask for a little bit more. But again, like, early on, mid-game, this is a good card. He's also inkable, so if, you need him for something else, that's cool. Then we have Eli LaBouffe, who I'm going to call Big Papa. And he costs 4, and he's a 2/5. But he quests for 2. So, he's going to be able to soak up a little bit more damage while he's out there questing. This guy's going to get you 4 or 6 lore every time. He's great. You should definitely put a couple of these in your deck. We've got just a couple more things, and these are just honorable mentions. Lawrence. I have no idea what movie this is from. Lawrence costs 3. He's a 0/4, which makes him a terrible buy. Now, he does quest for 2, which is nice. But he says that while this character has no damage, he gets +4 attack. So for 3, you get a 4/4 that quests for 2, as long as he doesn't have any damage. Now, if you're healing some of that damage with some of those healing cards, that would be great. Or, just attack with him as soon as he comes into play, and then he'll take a little damage, and you can quest with him after that. He's not going to be in the game that long, but that's fine, because he's got a stupid face. So another brutal card is the Huntsman. And I think we all know that the Huntsman tracks Snow White down and is so overcome by her purity and beauty that he's unable to complete his task of murdering her and cutting out her heart, and just lets her go. And that's how she finds all those 7 dwarves that we saw in the other deck. And he costs 2, and he's a 1/1. He quests for 2. Where's the value here? Whenever this character quests, you may draw a card, then choose and discard a card. So we get that tiny tactician play feature. Steel's not gonna let you take that card for free, but it's gonna let you at least do something. So, and whenever this character quests, so basically you get to do it once, maybe twice, but maybe that's all you need. And finally, the beefiest of the beefy boys, and it's Kronk. Kronk is dressed up in his finest junior chipmunk attire. He costs 6. He's a 4/5, so he quests for 2. And during your turn, whenever this character banishes another character in a challenge, you may deal 2 damage to chosen character. That is real. This is definitely a steel card to be reckoned with. And, again, he's rare, but not super rare. You could probably get a couple of these cards in like a month and really stick this in that steel deck. You're going to need some ink to pay for it. I think it's pretty good. Anyway. Okay, so that's it. I think this was fun, and I look forward to, more starter decks in the future. I am not going to open those booster packs right now. I think I'm going to share that with YouTube in a minute. But to all of you who have stuck through to the end and clicked the little clicker on Spotify, I just want you to know that I really appreciate it. There's a lot of people that stream on Twitch or whatever for a couple hours every day, but I'm simply not one of those guys. So when I come out and give you guys a half an hour, I'm pouring out my soul. And every single one of you that sticks to the end is a friend of the podcast. And I'm just sitting here surrounded by loose cards and penny sleeves. But before I prattle on forever, ashes to ashes, funk to funky, we know Mr. Toad's a junkie.